Everyone said Evan Granger was the kind of kid who would never run away. And that's exactly why no one saw it coming when he did. They called it an accident, a scare, a case of miscommunication. But nobody asked the most uncomfortable question. What if Evan left on purpose, and not for himself? Before we move forward, do subscribe, because this story may feel familiar in ways you'd rather ignore. The morning air in Everdale was cool and still, the kind that pressed against your skin gently and carried the scent of wet grass and old leaves. It was the kind of morning that promised routine, the same sidewalks, the same newspaper folds, the same greetings spoken half awake through screen doors. Evan Granger liked those mornings. They made him feel steady. He tightened the strap on his satchel and wheeled his bike out from the side of the porch. His mother had already left for her early shift at the bakery, but she had left a note on the kitchen counter, folded neatly next to a fresh granola bar and a carton of juice. "Don't forget your gloves, and smile if you see Mrs. Hollis. She says you always brighten her mornings." Mom Evan smiled to himself as he zipped the granola bar into his jacket pocket. He didn't mind the early hours. Not really. The quiet was nice, and there was something peaceful about being the first to see the day begin. Even the dogs knew him by now. They barked, but not the mean way, just the hello way. He pushed off down the driveway and pedaled through the mist. Each house he passed was familiar, part of the rhythm. The Flannery's faded wind chimes, the old Ford parked across two spaces at the corner, the mailbox with the cracked ceramic owl. He placed a paper at each step or stoop, always with care, always folded the same way. It wasn't just a route. It was a loop of small expectations, and Evan liked meeting them. At 7:14 a.m., he passed Mr. Lorne's house. The curtains were pulled back for once. Evan raised his hand and gave a small wave, as he always did. Mr. Lorne didn't wave back. Evan slowed his bike just for a moment. He squinted toward the front window, but the glare from the rising sun hit the glass at just the wrong angle. He couldn't see inside. Maybe Mr. Lorne hadn't noticed him, or maybe he wasn't in the room at all. He shrugged and pedaled onward. One missed wave didn't mean much. The rest of the route passed without issue. By 7:43 a.m., the last of the papers had been delivered. Evan cut through the small path behind the park, the shortcut that led back toward his school. He liked to stop for a moment at the edge of the creek and rest. Not long, just enough to hear the water moving under the bridge and feel like the world had noticed him. His bike came to a gentle stop beneath the elm trees. He leaned it upright against the bark and sat down in the grass. A breeze stirred the leaves above him. The sound was like distant whispers. He pulled the granola bar from his jacket pocket and peeled it open slowly, carefully, as though not to disturb the quiet. The sun rose higher. The creek babbled on, and the bike remained where he had left it, upright, untouched, waiting. Later that morning at 10:06 a.m., a groundskeeper named Henry spotted the bike while clearing brush near the path. He recognized it instantly. The green stripes on the frame, the white grips on the handlebars, the worn sticker that read Ranger Evan in uneven block letters. He looked around. There was no one nearby. The bike stood where someone had placed it carefully, not dropped, not knocked over, just standing, as if still waiting for someone to return. Henry called it in. And just like that, Everdale became quiet in a new kind of way. The hallway of Willow Creek Elementary was humming with the soft shuffle of backpacks, sneakers on linoleum, and the occasional burst of laughter behind classroom doors. By mid-morning, the main office was quiet until the phone rang. Mrs. Alcott, the school secretary, answered with her usual chipper voice. "Willow Creek Elementary, good morning." There was a pause on the line. Then Kira Granger's voice came through, unsure, slightly winded, as if she had been walking fast or had just stepped inside from the cold. "Hi, this is Kira Granger. I'm just calling to check if Evan made it in today. I usually get a message if he doesn't show up and—" Mrs. Alcott leaned toward her computer. "One moment, Miss Granger." She clicked through the attendance records, her brow furrowed. "He's marked absent this morning. We assumed he was home sick." There was a stretch of quiet on the line. "No," Kira said softly. "He left on time. He had his papers to deliver, and then he was supposed to walk straight to school." Mrs. Alcott straightened in her chair, now fully alert. "I haven't seen him this morning. Would you like me to check with his teacher and make an announcement?" Kira's voice lowered. "Yes, please." Kira paced the front of the bakery, her apron still dusted with flour. She had taken the early shift, opened by 5:30 a.m., and been restocking croissants when she realized Evan hadn't texted her a photo of the creek like he always did. Just a little tradition. One snapshot every morning on his route. Sometimes it was fog, sometimes ice on the leaves. Once, it had been a duck. Today, nothing. She called his phone again. No answer. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed a different number. Darren Granger answered on the second ring. "Hey, everything all right?" Kira didn't waste time. "Have you talked to Evan?" "No, not since the weekend. Why?" "He's not at school, and his phone's off." There was a silence. Then Darren's voice became clipped. All business. "I'll be there in 15. By the time Darren arrived at Willow Creek, the small school lobby was filled with a quiet tension. Kira was speaking with the principal. Two faculty aides stood nearby, concern in their eyes. A custodian offered coffee, which Kira declined twice before accepting out of politeness. "Bike's gone too," Darren said, standing beside her. "I checked the house. Looks like he left right on schedule." The school resource officer entered the building at 11:12 a.m. She asked simple questions, her tone gentle. What Evan was wearing, what he usually carried, if there was any chance he had gone to a friend's house or taken a different route. "He always took the shortcut by the creek," Kira said. "Every day." "And he doesn't skip," Darren added. "That kid's never missed a delivery." At 12:34 p.m., the officer returned from a quick sweep near the trail behind the park. "I found his bike," she said softly. "Upright. No damage. No sign of trouble. It's just there." Kira pressed her hands to her mouth. Darren put an arm around her shoulder. The officer hesitated. "I'd like your permission to start a wider search." Kira nodded, the motion small and tight. "Please, just find him." Across town, June Hollis poured a cup of tea in her small kitchen. The news hadn't reached her yet. Her radio was off. The curtains were half drawn. She sat with her notebook open, writing down a recipe she'd just pulled from an old cookbook. As she wrote, a memory tugged at her. That morning, for the first time in months, Evan had skipped her house. He always handed her paper to her in person. He would smile, she'd offer a butterscotch candy, and he'd ride off. But today, there had been no knock, no smile, no candy, no bell ringing from the curb. She looked up from the page. Something wasn't right. By early evening, the town library's community room was filled with more people than it had seen in years. Folding chairs had been arranged in hasty rows, and someone had pushed two tables together to serve as a makeshift stage. A few concerned neighbors brought cookies. Others stood with arms crossed, waiting to hear something they could hold on to. The local police chief, Marianne Kelton, stood near the front in uniform, though her sleeves were rolled up and her voice was soft when she spoke. "We are treating this as a missing child case," she said calmly. "There are no signs of distress or struggle. That said, we take every situation seriously. The sooner we act, the better the outcome. That's why we're asking for your help." Beside her, Kira sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Darren stood nearby, glancing occasionally toward the door, as if half expecting Evan to walk in at any moment with an apology and a half-eaten granola bar. "We need volunteers to walk the trails, check the neighborhood, Talk to anyone who may have seen Evan this morning," Chief Kelton continued. "You all know this town. You know the paths he might have taken better than any map could tell us." A hand went up in the back. June Hollis. "I'd like to help," she said, her voice clear despite her age. "Evan delivers to my house every day. But this morning, he didn't." There was a murmur across the room. "You're certain?" Chief Kelton asked. "I've kept a morning log since I retired," June replied, lifting a small notebook from her tote bag. "He always hands the paper to me at 7:36. Today, he didn't come." Kira turned sharply in her chair. "Why didn't anyone tell us this earlier?" "I wasn't sure it mattered until now," June said gently. "I didn't want to assume, but if it helps—" "It helps," Darren said, cutting in. "It means something changed before the end of his route." Chief Kelton nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Hollis. Would you be willing to show us the exact time and place?" "Of course." After the meeting, people dispersed into small search groups. Some grabbed flashlights, others pulled jackets tight against the early evening chill. Flashers blinked in the parking lot as volunteers climbed into trucks and cars, organizing routes and grids. June walked slowly down the sidewalk with her notebook tucked under her arm. She hadn't expected to be involved in something like this, not at her age, but something about Evan's absence had struck her deeply. She had taught for nearly 30 years. Children, she often said, were like clocks, always ticking, always following their own rhythms. Evan had a rhythm, and when something broke it, you noticed. Darren and Kira walked together along the trail behind the park, retracing Evan's usual route. "There's no tire marks off the path," Darren observed. "No signs he skidded or crashed." "He wouldn't just leave his bike," Kira murmured. "He loved that bike. Saved up all summer to repaint it with those stupid green stripes." They stopped beside the tree where the bike had been found. It stood now in the back of the patrol car, waiting for fingerprinting and closer examination. But the space it had occupied, flat, quiet earth beneath an elm, still felt weighted with absence. "He used to sit here sometimes," Kira said softly. "He'd stop and just listen." "I remember," Darren replied. "We walked this trail last fall. He collected leaves and tried to name them. Got most of them wrong." Kira smiled faintly, her eyes still searching the trees. "He's not the type to hide." "No," Darren agreed. "But he is the type to help someone else who is." She turned to look at him. "What are you saying?" "I don't know," he said. "But maybe someone told him they needed a secret, and he thought keeping it would be brave." Back in her modest living room, June flipped through her notebook again. She paused on a page from 2 weeks earlier, October 17th. Evan waved to Mr. Lorne again. "That boy always tries. That man never waves back." She tapped her pen on the margin, then circled it. Mr. Lorne lived 3 houses down from her. Retired, quiet, polite, in that way that leaves no warmth behind. That morning she had looked toward his window. The curtain had moved. Now she wasn't sure if that meant anything at all, but something in her stomach stirred, small and uneasy. The creek behind Willow Park shimmered under the overcast sky, its surface dotted with fallen leaves that drifted slowly beneath the wooden footbridge. There had always been something peaceful about that stretch of water. Quiet, steady, unchanging. The kind of place a boy might sit with his thoughts or rest after finishing his route. But that morning's peace had turned to stillness, and the stillness now felt heavy. Volunteers combed the area in cautious lines, their voices low, footsteps muffled on the damp ground. They stepped around stones and bushes gently, as if afraid to startle the woods themselves. Search dogs padded silently alongside them, noses twitching with each gust of breeze. Darren followed the edge of the creek alone, retracing the same path Evan had walked dozens of times. The soil beneath his boots was soft. Every few feet, he paused and looked for anything that didn't belong. A candy wrapper, a hat, a shoe. He found nothing. At one point, he knelt beside a flat rock near the bend, brushing away a thin layer of dirt. For a second, he thought he saw something. The edge of a coin. He picked it up. A 1953 wheat penny. His heart stilled. Evan had started collecting coins the year before, after a neighbor gave him a box of old change. He loved the ones that looked worn and forgotten. Darren had taken him to 2 antique fairs that summer to find more. This one? It looked exactly like the kind Evan might have saved. He turned it over in his hand, then tucked it into his pocket carefully. It wasn't evidence. Not really. But it felt like something. Elsewhere on the trail, June Hollis walked with a patrol officer named Araceli, her notebook cradled in her arms. She had brought it along not for credibility, but for comfort. The act of holding something that felt familiar made everything else seem less fragile. "I know it's probably nothing," June said quietly as they approached the back fence of Mr. Lorne's property. But Evan always waved to him, never missed a day. And this morning, I didn't see the man, but I saw the curtain move. Officer Araceli studied the fence. Tall, weathered, lined with ivy on one side. He has a side gate. Yes, it opens to the trail. Araceli scribbled a note. "I'll follow up." June hesitated, then added, "He wasn't always here, you know. Moved in 6, maybe 7 years ago. Keeps to himself." "Has he ever made you uncomfortable?" the officer asked. "No," June replied. Then, after a pause, "But I wouldn't say I know him either." Araceli gave her a gentle nod. "Thank you. Sometimes what doesn't feel right is just as important as what is." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind shifting the trees. Somewhere nearby, a crow called out once, then was quiet. Back at the command post near the school parking lot, Kira sat on the hood of a volunteer's truck with a thermos in her hand. She hadn't touched the coffee inside. The warmth felt better held than consumed. A patrol woman approached quietly. "Mrs. Granger, we've recovered a piece of clothing near the far side of the creek. We'd like you to take a look." Kira's chest tightened. "What kind of clothing?" "A scarf." She nodded and rose, her legs stiff from sitting too long. Darren met her halfway. The scarf was red, tucked into a plastic evidence bag and handled with careful fingers. It was patterned with blue stripes, simple but familiar. "I gave that to him last year," Kira said, her voice thin. "He liked how soft it was." "We found it snagged on a branch," the officer added. "No sign of anything else nearby. No damage, no footprints, not with the ground this soft." Kira touched the bag gently. "It means he passed that way, at least." Darren said nothing, but his hand rested on her shoulder. They stood there for a long time without speaking, listening to the murmur of radios and the rustle of leaves. Later that evening, June stopped by the local corner store, the one just down the hill from her house. The clerk behind the counter, Mateo, was stocking a shelf with bags of pretzels. "Evening, Ms. Hollis," he said cheerfully. "Out late?" "I won't stay long," she said. "I was wondering, did you happen to see Evan this morning? He sometimes stops in before school." Mateo frowned. "Actually, yeah, now that you mention it. He came in real early. Bought gum. I thought it was strange because I thought he was a mint kid." "Was he alone?" Mateo hesitated. "Number. There was a guy with him. Tall, older. I didn't pay attention at first. Figured it was a relative." June's breath caught. "Do you remember what he looked like?" "Not really. Glasses, maybe. Baseball cap. Sorry, I was half asleep." "That's okay," June said softly. "You remembered enough." She thanked him and stepped back outside into the deepening dusk, her scarf tugged tight around her throat. As she stood under the flickering lamplight by the door, her mind swirled quietly. A man, with Evan, buying gum before dawn. Who walks a boy to a corner store before sunrise and doesn't take him to school? The whiteboard in the temporary command post, set up inside the school's multi-purpose room, was now covered in notes, timelines, map grids, known routes, last sightings. Photocopies of Evan's school picture had been taped to the corners like anchors, reminders of who they were all working for. At the center, a list had begun to take shape, written in clear block letters. People Evan knew well. Tyler Hayes, friend, same class. Ms. Alcott, school secretary. June Hollis, neighbor, regular stop. Mateo Vega, store clerk. Coach Rayner, after-school programs. Darren Granger, father. Kira Granger, mother. Lila Barnes, bus driver. Mrs. Nix, babysitter, occasional. Kira stared at the board, arms folded. She took in the names slowly, one by one. He always waved to Mr. Lorne, she said quietly. Every morning, without fail. He's not on this list, Darren replied. Number because I don't think Evan really knew him. Not the way he knew these people. Darren took the dry erase marker and added a name at the bottom. Franklin Lorne, neighbor. Chief Kelton stepped into the room just as they finished. She nodded at the updated list, then looked toward Kira. We've spoken with everyone so far, she said. Except Mr. Lorne. He wasn't home when we knocked earlier. A call went unanswered. Can you try again? Kira asked, her voice thin but steady. We're planning to, gently. For now, we're still treating this as a non-criminal event. Kira said nothing, just nodded once. Across the room, June approached with Tyler Hayes walking beside her, his shoulders slightly hunched beneath a too-big hoodie. I told her I had something to say, Tyler mumbled, eyes on the floor. You're not in trouble, Chief Kelton said gently. We're just listening. Tyler glanced toward Kira. He didn't tell me where he was going, but he did say he had a plan, that he might not do the whole route one day, that he might take a longer way instead. What did he mean by that? Darren asked. I don't know, Tyler said. He just said, sometimes you gotta go a different way if you want to help somebody else. The room fell quiet. Kira's voice broke the silence. Did he ever talk about someone else? Someone who might have needed help? Tyler nodded slowly. There was this kid. I don't know his name. Evan said he saw him crying once in the woods. He said he told him it was okay to hide if that made him feel safe. Darren leaned forward. Do you know where in the woods? Tyler pointed vaguely toward the map. By the old shed, I think. The one near the trail where the water gets deeper. Chief Kelton exchanged a glance with the officer standing behind her. That shed belongs to Mr. Lorne, she said. An hour later, Darren and June stood just off the main trail, facing the structure Tyler had mentioned. It wasn't much, an old garden shed, paint faded, padlocked shut. Ivy had crept up one side, and a single lantern hung crooked by the door. Darren walked the perimeter slowly. No broken locks, no signs anyone went in or out lately, he said. But the padlock looks new. June stood still for a long moment. Then she whispered, It wasn't here last fall. I remember. I cut through this way with my niece. She was visiting from Columbus. Darren tested the door gently, just to confirm. It didn't budge. We'll need to get a warrant to open it properly, he said. June's eyes scanned the space around them. If Evan was here, even once, he left no mess. Or he cleaned up carefully. She didn't add. That evening, back at June's house, she opened one of her older notebooks, a plain red one from a few springs back. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she found it. April 4th. He left a box of candy on my porch. Said it wasn't from him. Said someone gave it to me to give to you. Didn't say who. Just smiled and left. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Children often passed things along like notes, tiny couriers without understanding. But now, reading it again, she wondered who that candy really came from, and who Evan had been carrying messages for. Meanwhile, in his quiet living room, Franklin Lorne stood near his window with the lights off, watching as the last of the volunteers left the woods for the night. He didn't wave. He never did. The shed stayed locked. Officer Araceli had returned with another officer to examine it by flashlight, but without immediate cause, they couldn't enter. Not yet. They took photos, noted the newer lock, and promised to return with proper paperwork. Darren watched from the edge of the trail, arms crossed over his chest. The woods around him felt different now. Not just quiet, but hollow, like a room waiting for someone to return. He turned toward the small bench near the deeper part of the creek, where Evan liked to stop. And there, resting half buried in the soft dirt by the tree roots, was something familiar. He knelt and brushed it free. A small, weathered plastic capsule, the kind found inside toy machines at the grocery store. Inside was a folded paper. Darren opened it carefully. "This is where I wait until it's okay." At the station, Kira sat in a small room with a plain desk and a corkboard on the wall. She'd been asked to review anything else Evan might have said or done in the last few weeks that could help, even the smallest details. She hesitated before speaking. "He's been quieter," she said slowly. "Not sad, just thoughtful. He was reading more, writing in his little notebook at night." "Did he mention anyone new?" asked Chief Kelton. But he did ask a strange question last week." "What was it?" Kira looked down at her hands. "He asked if people could get in trouble for keeping a secret that helped someone." Kelton's brow lifted. "And what did you say?" "I told him it depends on the secret." At home, Kira went to Evan's room for the first time since the morning he disappeared. The door creaked slightly when she pushed it open. Everything was in its place. The comics arranged by character, the map of the U.S. pinned above his bed, his school folder tucked neatly into his backpack on the hook. But something felt incomplete. She crossed to his desk, where a spiral notebook lay beside a row of pencils, each sharpened down to half their original length. She flipped gently through the pages. Most were doodles and small observations, birds he'd seen, jokes from his friends, a running count of the weirdest things people say when they think no one is listening. But on the second-to-last page was something different. If someone hurts someone, but no one sees, is it still real? Meanwhile, June was sitting in her kitchen with a cup of tea when her phone rang. It was Officer Araceli. "We have something," she said. The following morning, June met Araceli at the precinct. A new report had come in overnight. A local store, one that hadn't yet been visited, had recently installed a security camera facing the street. The footage from the morning of Evan's disappearance showed the boy stepping off his bike outside the corner store. He was holding a folded dollar, and his satchel hung crookedly across his chest. Then, a man stepped into the frame. He wore a windbreaker, a baseball cap pulled low, and sunglasses. Evan handed him the folded bill. The man handed him gum. They said nothing. The timestamp was 6:58 a.m. "He wasn't taken," Araceli said quietly. "He was cooperating." June watched again, leaning closer. "He looks like he knows the man." Araceli nodded. "Or wants him to think he does." That afternoon, a neighbor named Alyssa called the tip line. She lived 2 houses down from Mr. Lorne. Her voice shook over the phone. "I was walking my dog the other night and saw lights in that old shed. I figured maybe he was doing repairs, but I didn't hear any tools, just low voices." "Could you tell what was being said?" the dispatcher asked. "Number." But the boy's voice, it didn't sound scared. It sounded like he was trying to convince someone of something. Darren walked the creek trail again that evening, slower this time. He moved past the bench and toward the curve in the path where he and Evan had once stopped to collect acorns for a school project. Just before the turn, he noticed something new. Carved into the base of a tree, low to the ground where only a child might leave it, was a rough shape, a triangle. It was the same symbol Evan used to draw beside his name in notebooks and cards. His adventurer's mark, he called it. It wasn't vandalism. It was a signpost. He wasn't lost. He was leaving a trail. Franklin Lorne opened his front door precisely halfway. The porch light behind him remained off, leaving most of his face in shadow. He was wearing a navy sweater with sleeves pushed up to his elbows. His hands stayed hidden behind the door. "Yes?" he asked. Officer Araceli stood on the step, calm but attentive. "Good afternoon, Mr. Lorne. I wanted to follow up on a few questions about the trail that runs along the back of your property." He didn't open the door any farther. "I told the other officer I haven't seen anything unusual. The boy, Evan, is it? I only saw him in passing." She offered a polite smile. "We'd still like to clarify a few things. May we come in?" Lorne paused. Then, "I'd rather not. I have a bad cold. Not great company right now." Araceli nodded slowly. "Understood. Would you mind telling me about the shed in your backyard? Some neighbors reported hearing voices near it." "It's just storage," he said quickly. "Old tools, gardening supplies." "When did you last use it?" He glanced back over his shoulder, just for a second. "A few weeks ago. It's locked for safety." "Would you be willing to unlock it for us, Mr. Lorne?" "I'm not sure that's necessary," he said, voice cooling slightly. "Unless you have cause." Araceli didn't press. "We'll be in touch again soon." She left a business card tucked carefully between the mailbox and the siding. He didn't wave. He never did. That evening, June called Darren. "I want to try something." 20 minutes later, they stood outside Lorne's house, June holding a small tin of oatmeal cookies wrapped in foil. "Are you sure about this?" Darren asked. "I'm not accusing him," she said. "Just watching." She knocked gently. The porch creaked under their feet. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door cracked open again, same as before. June smiled warmly. "I thought you might like something sweet. I've been baking all day. It helps with worry." Lorne hesitated. "I appreciate it, but I'm not well." "Still, it's good to have something warm in the house," she said, holding out the tin. After a pause, he reached for it. That's when June noticed them. By the back door inside, not far from the kitchen, sat a small pair of boots. Scuffed at the toes, laces tied neatly. They were far too small to belong to a grown man. She said nothing, just offered another smile. "Well, I hope you feel better soon," she said softly. He nodded once and shut the door. Later, in her kitchen, June sketched the layout she'd seen inside. Darren sat across from her, studying it. "You're sure they were boots?" "I taught for 30 years. I know children's shoes when I see them." Darren leaned back. "Then why were they sitting by his back door?" June didn't answer, but both of them were thinking the same thing. That night, after the sun fell and most of the volunteers had gone home, Darren walked the trail again. This time he brought a flashlight. He wasn't trying to be heroic, just restless. Too many thoughts pacing in his head to stay still. When he passed Lorne's backyard, he paused behind a tree. The shed was still locked, still quiet, until the door opened. A shape moved, tall, thin, and dragged something heavy and long behind him, covered in a dark tarp. It wasn't large enough to alarm anyone outright, but it was being moved with purpose. Darren stepped back, breath held. Lorne lifted the object into a wheelbarrow and disappeared down the slope behind his property, toward the shallow ravine behind the park's tree line. Darren didn't follow. Not yet. Instead, he went straight to June. At sunrise, June left a voicemail for Officer Araceli. "Check the backwoods behind Mr. Lorne's property. He's moving things. And he's doing it at night." She paused. "And tell your team to bring the key, or a crowbar." The shed door gave way with a hollow snap. It was just after 7 a.m., when Officer Araceli returned with 2 colleagues and a warrant in hand. The early sunlight slanted through the trees, casting long shadows across the frost-damp grass as the officers stepped toward the old garden shed. Kira and Darren stood back, quiet, holding coffee neither of them had touched. When the padlock dropped to the ground, it made no noise, only the faint sound of metal meeting wood. The door creaked open on reluctant hinges. Inside was silence, and then the quiet shifted. The officers stepped in carefully. What they found wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't cluttered, it wasn't filthy, it wasn't empty. The inside had been arranged carefully, intentionally. In one corner sat a twin mattress with neatly folded blankets. A crate of packaged snacks and bottled water rested nearby. A small lantern, battery-operated, hung from a nail in the wall. A flashlight lay on top of a stack of magazines, most of them old comic books. There was even a shoebox filled with coins. Darren recognized them immediately. "These are Evan's." Next to the mattress, there was a folded note on top of a spiral notebook. Araceli opened it slowly, using gloves. The writing was simple, familiar. "If someone's not safe, you stay where they can't get hurt. I can wait until it's okay." There was no sign of Evan himself, but the space had clearly been made for him, or someone like him. Outside, the air had turned colder. Clouds were moving in. The search area was immediately expanded to include the ravine and tree line behind Mr. Lorne's property. Lorne himself was nowhere to be found. Officers knocked again on his front door. No answer, no car in the driveway. Neighbors began to gather at the edges of their lawns. Something had changed. Later that afternoon, Kira sat on the porch steps of June's house, her hands tucked into her sleeves. "He built a place," she said softly. "A whole place for himself, out there." June nodded. "He didn't run. He relocated." Darren stood nearby, arms crossed, his gaze distant. He wasn't afraid. He was planning. Kira looked up. Why would a boy plan to disappear unless he was trying to protect something? June didn't answer, but in her mind, she returned to that note. "Until it's okay." Then the call came in. Another child. Tyler Hayes. Hadn't come home after school. Tyler's backpack was found near the bench by the creek, resting against the base of the tree where Evan's symbol had been carved. Inside was a pack of gum, a crumpled drawing, and a note written in pencil. He said, "This is where it's safe, that no one can lie when you're quiet." Search teams returned to the woods, this time with dogs, this time knowing what to look for. Not signs of panic, but traces of careful, quiet footprints. It didn't take long. Near the deeper bend of the creek, under a small pile of leaves and branches arranged with childlike precision, they found the entrance. A small dugout, not a cave, just a low space where the earth dipped and hollowed under tree roots. A blanket was pinned against the side like a curtain. Inside, Tyler was resting, awake, calm. He looked up when the flashlight beam reached him. "You're not supposed to be here yet," he said softly. He said, "Wait 3 days." "Where is Evan?" Araceli asked gently. Tyler pointed toward the opposite side of the creek. "There," he said, but not for long. Tyler sat on the back bumper of a patrol car, legs swinging slightly, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't scared exactly, but his eyes had the faraway look of someone who had been holding something too big, too long. "I wasn't running," he told Officer Araceli quietly. "I was just following the map." She crouched beside him, calm and patient. "Whose map?" "Evan. He showed me how to get to the quiet spot. Said if anything ever happened, I should go there." "And wait. Why didn't you tell anyone sooner?" Tyler looked down at his hands. "Because he asked me not to. He said it would only work if people were looking for him, not me." She let the silence stretch between them. a kind of understanding settling into the space. "What were you waiting for?" He hesitated. Then, 3 days. In the woods, the search shifted. Teams followed Tyler's directions across the creek, fanning out in tighter patterns now, eyes low to the ground. No shouting, no panic, just listening. At 6:32 p.m., a volunteer called out softly, I think he's here." Evan lay curled beneath a cluster of branches, blanket drawn up to his chin, a flashlight still on beside him. Its beam faded but steady. He was sleeping, or rather, waiting with his eyes closed. When the officer touched his shoulder, Evan blinked, then sat up slowly, looking not surprised, only tired. "Is it time?" he asked. At the station, Evan sat beside his mother, wrapped in a large coat that smelled like a stranger's fabric softener. He was quiet but alert. His fingers picked at the edge of a paper cup filled with lukewarm broth. Kira sat close, her hand resting over his. "You scared me," she whispered. He didn't look up. "I didn't mean to. I know, honey. But we didn't know where you were." He finally turned toward her. That was the point. In a side office, Chief Kelton and Officer Araceli listened to Evan's account in pieces, not like a confession, but like puzzle pieces he had to place gently, one at a time. "I saw him talking to that other boy," Evan said. "The one who cried in the woods. I don't know his name." "What did you see, Evan?" "I think Mr. Lorne got mad at him. Grabbed his arm too hard. He didn't know I was there. I think the boy ran away after." "Did you tell anyone?" Evan shook his head. "I didn't have proof, just a feeling. But the boy, he looked scared. So I started leaving gum at the trail. It was our signal." "Why the shed?" "I was going to ask if the boy wanted to hide there, just for a night or two, until things were okay." Araceli's voice was soft. "And then, Mr. Lorne found the shed. He locked it, started hanging around the creek more. I think he knew someone had been there. I stopped going. And you?" Evan's voice dropped. "I made a new place." Later that night, Darren stood on the porch of Kira's house, watching through the front window as Evan, freshly showered and in pajamas, rested on the couch. He was watching cartoons, not really laughing, but watching, absorbing the noise, relearning the feeling of normal. Darren didn't knock yet. He stayed outside with his thoughts. June appeared at his side, as if summoned by quiet. "He was protecting someone," she said. "He was willing to disappear," Darren replied. They both were. June nodded. And neither of them said a word about blame. They just waited. He sighed, like the world would fix itself if they gave it enough time. She didn't answer that. Instead, she offered a small notebook. "Evans, your son's a good writer," she said. "You should read what he doesn't say out loud." The next morning, news of Evan and Tyler's return spread quickly through town. There were no official charges, no loud headlines, just a sense of quiet relief and quiet questions. Mr. Lorne's property was searched thoroughly. Nothing definitive was found, but Lorne didn't return. He left Everdale quietly. The locks were changed. The porch light never came on again. The house sat still, empty. Evan stood at the edge of the creek, hands in his jacket pockets, the morning sun just beginning to warm the tops of the trees. His bike rested a few feet behind him, the kickstand steady in the earth. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running a route. He was just standing still. Kira sat on a nearby bench, watching him with careful eyes, not hovering, not pressing, just present. When Evan turned back toward her, his expression was calm. "This is where I left the scarf," he said. "I didn't mean to. It got caught on the branch, and I didn't go back for it." She smiled gently. "It helped us know where to look." "I know," he said. They sat together in the quiet that followed, the creek moving along beside them, unbothered. The same as it always had. At the station, Officer Araceli reviewed her final report. There was no official charge brought against Mr. Lorne, no file strong enough to hold him. No one had seen the boy Evan described. No formal complaint had ever been made. But people in town remembered. And sometimes that was enough. The whispers were soft, but they stayed. A week later, Darren took Evan out for a walk. Just the two of them. No questions, no pressure. They brought peanut butter sandwiches and sat on a bench behind the school, near the back garden where students grew vegetables in spring. Evan finally broke the quiet. I thought if I stayed away, they'd pay more attention. To what? To where that boy went. To what happened. I thought if they had to look for me, maybe they'd start seeing the other stuff. Darren nodded slowly. You were trying to protect someone. Evan didn't respond, but the silence said enough. I wish you'd told me, Darren said. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I would've, he said gently. Next time, you let me try. Later that evening, June tucked the final page into a manila folder and closed her notebook. She had written it all down, not to publish, not to send to a newspaper, but simply to remember, to preserve. She gave it a name that felt right. The Boy Who Rode Alone. And in the margin of the last page, she added Evan's adventurer's triangle. A simple shape, small and steady. It was early, the sky just beginning to shift from gray to gold. June opened her front door and found the newspaper waiting for her on the step, rolled neatly, wrapped with a rubber band. Tucked inside, there was a second envelope. A handwritten note, folded twice. She opened it carefully. For Ms. Hollis. Thanks for always waving. I'm back on the route. I'll be early some days. I like watching the town wake up. Evan. She smiled, her eyes soft. And for a long time, she stood at the edge of her porch, watching the sidewalk, listening for the quiet ring of a bike bell. Not because she was waiting for trouble, but because she knew that, somewhere down the block, someone was moving forward. One paper at a time.